Vanchakopa Churubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Hare Krishna. So this is the beginning of a series of talks that I wanted to give about my 50 years in Krishna consciousness. I gave an introduction to this already, what it's going to be, what it's not going to be, and that I would start out with how I came to Krishna consciousness, which of course that'll add on another 20 years to the 50 years. And don't worry, I'm not going to get into great detail. But this could be a little bit too mundane or boring for some. So, you could maybe skip ahead to the next ones that I'm going to do that'll be more directly about ISKCON and Krishna conscious descriptions. But my story, how I came to Krishna consciousness, it's really not especially unique at all. There's just thousands of such stories. And each one of them is, I find, so interesting to see how Krishna pulls each soul towards him. In so many ways, he ropes us in to reignite that relationship. And so in this sense, every story is unique in that it's a tale of that love unfolding. And generally, coming to Krishna consciousness, it's a gradual process and often a subtle process that begins long before we met a devotee or got a book or heard a kirtan. Usually there's a series of events that starts to push us in Krishna's direction. And that push, it could have started sometime in this life or many lifetimes ago. Now my story starts back in 1950 in Detroit, Michigan, United States. And that period in history, the 50s in America, that was like a few years after World War II. So this was the post-World War II boom. Everything was booming. There was a big baby boom. And the economy was booming. And development of suburbs was booming. And, there was just a general feeling after the war of, eagerness to have families, and that there was very confident that there was a bright future. And pretty much the 50s was, pretty good time for middle-class people, and America had much more money to spend than ever before, and much more consumer goods. And basically, it was a golden age of American capitalism, so to speak. And it wasn't all peaches and cream. There were a lot of big changes and challenges during those times, especially the civil rights movements. That also boomed right into the mainstream American way of life. I remember hearing about the first Negro woman who, I think her name was Rosa Parks, and it was like in the mid-50s sometime. She refused to give her seat up on a bus for a white person. Wow, radical. Horrible, isn't it? And the desegregation of the schools all was going on during those 50s, which there was still, huge opposition, especially from the South. So big changes there, and there was a Cold War also going on between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, so there was those kind of tensions happening during the time when I was born, and so that's kind of the 50s backdrop. And specifically, Detroit was the place I was born, which also was having major booms, so to speak, because it became the center of car manufacturing in America. So it was dubbed the Motor City. And men were like migrating families from all over to join those assembly lines in the factories, which was really not a very glamorous life, but many jobs available. And also Detroit was a big boom in the music industry. And so it became famously known as the Motown, still today, Motown, because it was like the heartbeat of this new kind of black soul music. And so many big names came out of Detroit. In those days, probably most of you people, whoever will listen to this, don't even know. But, you know, the Supremes, Marvin Gaye, Stevie Wonder, Aretha Franklin, even the Jackson 5, that's where Michael Jackson started out. So their music, this kind of special sort of really, you know, soul music, it did wonders actually to bring together a racially divided country, because it just touched people of all ages and races. So that's a backdrop. And I was born on the east side, which was, of course, an all-white neighborhood. You didn't see any black people in that area. You didn't even see Asian people. Like, I remember, it stuck in my mind that I saw a lady wearing a sari once walking down our nearby street, and it was like, wow, freaky. So, you know, it was real. Anyway, it was a very, very ordinary middle-class upbringing. And so you may wonder, well, you know, if it was so ordinary, why bother even talking about it? But I think the roots and the background of all devotees is just part of that story in coming to Krishna consciousness. And, you know, as devotees, we may think that our life prior to devotional life is irrelevant. But our histories have certainly impacted on us and influenced us in many ways. So I think it can be useful exercise to explore the past, to get a sense of what kind of conditioning we came into this world with, and how and when Krishna began to interfere with that. And yeah, we may also see what kind of conditioning we brought into Srila Prabhupada's fledgling mission. So we'll just see what comes up. As I said, typical middle-class family. We were fairly close. I had a brother 3 years older than me who I loved to hang out with. He was a sportsman, and he didn't really think about anything other than that. My sister, I had a sister who, she's much older than me, so I hardly knew her. She left home early. My father, of course, he was working in the factory, one of the factories. He was a foreman. And the provider for the family, which was a standard that at that time that, you know, mostly the women were at home. And my mother, she was a very cheerful stay-at-home mom. Until all of her kids grew up. Then she went back to school and became a nurse. And so my mother's family, at least on that side, they had very close ties. She had 4 sisters and a brother. And my grandmother was like, you know, the matriarch of this very large family. And she was just a super pious woman with all good qualities, really. She was like a storybook grandma. She was a fantastic cook and a professional caterer. So, you know, we had our, you know, standard big family reunions where everybody would get a bit tipsy and sing old songs together. And, you know, so it was fairly loving family and somewhat religious on my mother's side, at least. Mostly on my mother's side. And we had a typical big family home, 4 bedrooms. It was like, you know, in those days, I don't even know of any families that would live in apartments. That just was weird. You wouldn't. You had to have your own home with a front yard and a backyard and 2-car garage and whatever. But by this time, everybody had a TV in the living room. This is a new thing, 50s. But they were quite small, more like a little computer screen. And a lot of them were still just black and white. Pretty much it was like the golden age of television, and practically all of the shows were family friendly. You would never see on TV anything that a kid shouldn't be seeing. You know, they had these shows. Well, I'm sure there's hardly anybody left alive who would know these TV shows, but like I Love Lucy, just like simple comedy, and Leave It to Beaver about some little boy. Lassie Come Home was about a dog. And Father Knows Best, how about that? You probably couldn't even have a program called that nowadays. What about Mother Knows Best? So it was very innocent compared to what kids and people in general see now. There were strict rules, what could be shown on TV. You couldn't even show, even a married couple in a double bed during, the kids' time that they might watch TV, So, it was very different, it was different. Although, the kids really, for me, I didn't even want to watch TV much. That was just if it was raining or, when you had to come in at night. But it was like, kids came home from school and they just hit the streets and, sports and climbing trees and kick the can, whatever. And there was no hovering airplane parents. They just let the kids go out. I mean, I guess it was safe, considered to be safe, and the kids just did what they did, So that home life, it was very, very regulated and predictable and stable. Everybody had their dinner at around 5 o'clock, and the table was set up, and we had to all sit down at the table, and there would be no question of doing anything else. Looking at the newspaper or anything is out of the question. You have dinner, we sit down and Grandma says the prayer, and we have to eat everything on our plates because they're still, a sense of no waste. After the war, they struggled to get all this stuff that they had, So I remember my dad saying, if you don't eat that, what are we going to do? Send it to the poor people in India? So it's like, God, what? This country is just full of poor people. That's the way India was portrayed in those days, And of course, pretty much everybody, we went to church on a Sunday, and my mom and especially my grandmother, just really saintly, just read the Bible every night. And, so this was before, this 50s is kind of just the beginning. It was before the kind of corporate takeover of everything. So things were maybe a little more personal, less government controlled. Like we had our own family doctor that would come to our house. He wasn't, under the control of what he could do or what he couldn't do. And, pretty much we had home meals. There was not, there were fast food places, but it wasn't like, that wasn't a daily affair. And, sports, people were really into local sports because the people, like if it was the Detroit Tigers, there's people from Detroit that play on the team. It's not people from Timbuktu, So it was like a little more, And people, at that time they didn't really travel so much. They were really, the 50s was when they built the interstate highway all over the United States. And air travel was really more for wealthy. People would get dressed up to go on the planes. So it wasn't common yet. And, the emotional environment, it was, let's say, it wasn't a time of sharing feelings, especially men. You know, it's funny how you can live with people for many years and really not know them at all. I mean, I would say that about most of my family members, you know. It wasn't, it wasn't an emotionally highly aware time. And you know, it was predictable. It was predictable times where people are expected to conform to traditional roles, you know, go to school. Now, not that many people went to college at that time. It wasn't like expected that everybody goes to college, but everybody's got to get a skill, and pretty soon after getting out of high school, you're expected, probably you'll get married, and soon after have kids. You know, that was just how it was supposed to be, you know, and that people followed that narrative pretty closely during those times. So this is a basic external environment. Psychologists today, they can deduce many things from such details, you know, possible family patterns and attitudes that are likely to unfold from, you know, your upbringing, where you were, what your family was like. But as devotees, we know that there's just so much more to factor into our, you know, into the understanding of our human condition. We know that we did not arrive in the world with a blank slate. We carried into this. We carried into this life a nature and a karma from previous lives, and that right from the beginning we have specific inclinations and desires and nature. So I think it's interesting for everyone, you know, interesting exercise to reflect on what kind of karma we carried into this life, what kind of gifts or baggage or tendencies would we bring in before we had further conditioning. And for me, thinking back, it's very apparent to me that I had certain attitudes and feelings that were present from my earliest remembrance. I always remember I had this subtle feeling. It's not that these are like, you know, when you're little, you're not consciously, you know, you don't even have the words to form what you feel. But when you look back, you can see there was subtle feelings there from the beginning. And I remember feeling somewhat separate or somewhat detached from what was going on around me, as if I was more of an observer than a participant in what was going on around me. And always watching and wondering and thinking, what are they doing? Having a kind of a feeling of being somewhat a stranger in a strange land. And these internal feelings resulted in me being rather quiet and shy kid. Not extreme, but yeah, I just was kind of standing back from things. And I also had this subtle feeling that I wanted to be or go somewhere else, and that I needed help. But these are very fine, very subtle things that, you know, as a very young child, were there. I mean, they just came in with me. I remember when I was probably between 7 and 10 years old. Probably more like about, around 8 or something. I used to stare out in my bedroom. I could lay in my bed and look out up through the window. There was a high window, and I could see the stars out there. And the North Star was always right there. And so I remember that I used to kind of stare up there, especially at the North Star. I felt like I had this kind of connection. I even gave it a name, Timmy. I called the North Star Timmy. And it was sort of like I used to lay there and call out to the universe, or call out to Timmy, for help. Now, I don't know, I wasn't thinking what kind of help, or I wasn't thinking there was anything bad, but there was just this kind of inner feeling, Now, later, actually, when I became a devotee, I came to know that North Star is Dhruvaloka. And so I thought, wow, that's cool. Maybe Dhruva heard my prayer. So I was actually looking out. For help, and calling up to, Dhruva and the North Star. And then these kind of feelings, were exemplified by my choice of costume on Halloween. Every year, I just wanted to be Peter Pan. Every year. What are you going to be? Peter Pan. Because I just was fascinated by that story. And that song that, I don't know if most people maybe have heard it, I'll never grow up, I'll never grow up, not me. That was Peter. And, well, I just love the idea of, going to Neverland. It really had an appeal. And I used to look out the window again, and I would kind of call out to Tinkerbell, come, would you come and sprinkle that fairy dust on me? And then I can go to Neverland where I can never grow up and just play and stay young. And, isn't that also interesting? I mean, really, that's Srila Prabhupada. He heard my prayer, that he came and he sprinkled his foot dust in the holy name, to carry us to Goloka, where it is that way. So I don't know, there's a hankering in the soul, no matter how young you are, how little you are, to a natural thing to call out. I also felt another way that I always felt was acutely aware and affected by suffering in the world. Like, when I saw things on the news or on TV, or, you didn't really see much suffering around in our life, but when I did see, I would just become really disturbed by it. I mean, it was all internal, but I couldn't stop thinking about things. Like, I remember today, this is like, 65 years ago or something. The first time I saw a man that, was deformed, and he was a beggar, and he was outside of a window, and I was just like, the window of a grocery store, standing in front. I still can see him, because it was so shocking to me that, look at Mom, look at that person, and I remember thinking, well, that guy, somebody should go and help him. So, then I used to look around, and everybody was all like happy and bubbly in their life, and I thought, but how can they be like that when how can they just act like those things aren't happening? It really affected me. And so, I was basically also, another feeling all the time was like, I felt like consumed by why questions. I'm sure it annoyed my mother to death. Well, why do I have to do that? Well, why? Why? There has to be a reason for everything. And, there isn't always, my mother, well, make your bed, Susan. And I'm like, but why? I'm just going to go back in there tonight. Why? I meant it. She didn't get it. So there was this constant sense of internal questioning, but why do things have to be the way they are? Why, And so for me, looking back, I'm sure everyone can look back and find things, how they always were. What was there? This is coming through from before. This didn't come in this life. This was brought in. And everyone has that, all different. And these were just a few, some of the tendencies that I know I brought in from another life. But apart from these underlying feelings that were invisible to others, I just went on as a normal kid, of course. I was just immersed in playing baseball and gymnastics, and I loved dance. Did ballet for many, many years. And, hanging out with my brother, we had what you call a daredevil club where, we would dare each other to do dangerous things like jump from one garage roof to another garage roof, and do all these like fun things that kids like to do. I joined the Girl Scouts. But my mother was a den mother for the Boy Scouts for my brother. And actually, I liked what they were doing better. So I used to tag along with them. And I still remember, I can tell you, that Scouts motto. Because it's very cool, actually. I think you had to raise your hands like this or whatever. And you would say, a Scout is trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, reverent. That's amazing, isn't it? I mean, those are all devoted qualities. I heard that the guy who started the Boy Scouts actually got his whole idea and everything from India. I don't know if that's true, but it's actually pretty amazing. And yeah, so those are things, what I was doing, wasting my life. And, school, I was just going through it. I was a good student. I got all really good marks and till a certain point. And in school, we had these regular air raid drills because there's like this fear of Russian communism. We had to like go under our little desks and stuff, and they'd play their air raid drill. Like, I guess they were expecting, bombs to start dropping. It's freaky. And because we were taught, we were taught that, America is great. America's the greatest. We're the good guys, and there's all these bad guys out there. We're definitely brainwashed into that. But again, despite all this normalcy, everything really normal, I really did have this underlying feeling that there must be more to life. I had this kind of sense of boredom with what I was seeing. I remember very clearly sitting at the dinner table with my brother next to me. And, we had a whole big family thing. My grandma and grandpa would be there and, big dinner. And of course, the older people, what do they talk about? Their arthritis and their kidney and their liver and this thing and that thing, and how Betty had a heart attack. And, now I get it. Now I understand that kind of conversation, unfortunately. But I really remember whispering to my brother, look, if I ever get that way, that I don't have anything else to talk about but that, will you should shoot me. My brother said, yeah, me too. Let's make a pact, we'll shoot each other. So, that was the thing, this kind of like boredom with what was going on around. And so by the time, I think I was like 10 or 11, I used to steal some cigarettes from my sister. And at that time, smoking was like cool. Like every movie and every, anybody that was a cool person smoked cigarettes everywhere. There was smoke everywhere. It's really changed. And so, I had to try doing that, so I would sneak up. Nobody in my family smoked, but so I'm sure they could smell it on me. But anyway, I used to climb up over the railings and go on our roof. We had this slanted roof, and I'd climb up on the roof, and I would lay there and, smoke the cigarette and look up at the stars. And I remember I just used to lay there and I would feel like, oh my God, I'm just like a tiny, tiny speck, on this, there's this like earth ball, and it's like floating in the middle of this black sky, and I'm just this little dot of nothing. And I would try to figure out, I would really think out there. I used to do it all the time. And I would go up there and I'd try to imagine, well, how far does it go? The black and the stars and that it just can't go on forever, and there must be an end to it. And then when it ends, but then there has to be something beyond it. And then I would speculate, well, maybe this universe maybe it's actually inside like a bigger universe. And, maybe there's another one beyond that. And then it was just like, I would freak myself out trying to figure it out. Or I remember thinking, maybe this universe is just like an atom inside a gigantic body, like the cells in my body. Maybe inside every cell in my body, maybe there's like tiny worlds inside of them, So I used to terrify myself trying to understand, well, if everything is, try to understand what was eternal. Like there's something I heard, there's something eternity, like no beginning and no end. And it was like, wow, my brain would just fizzle. And it would really freak me out. But it really made me think, just laying there, looking at all those stars. And I'm like, but I mean, there's billions of them. There has to be something in them. There has to be somebody or something. It can't just be like this one little one. We're just on a tiny one and there's billions of them. And like, there has to be other people or something going on. It was just such a, I think really Dr. Frog is the appropriate, like I'm in my well and I'm trying to understand the ocean. And, it really literally used to just blow my brains, trying to figure these things out, but it seemed important, And, so it's something to note that, kids, they're in small bodies, but they're souls, and I think that they're often thinking about more than what we think they're thinking about. At least that was my case, and nobody else seemed to be pondering any of these things at all. I didn't hear anybody talking about any of this stuff, except maybe I had one aunt. Her name was Dorcas, Aunt Dorcas. She was a really large-bodied lady. And she was really well-read, and she loved poetry, and she used to recite to us, and she used to make all the kids do all these kind of creative things. And I heard her say once that she thought she was a reincarnation of Khalil Gibran. And I was like, what? I never even heard anybody say reincarnation, and everybody thought it was hysterical that my Aunt Dorcas, had this kind of feeling about Khalil Gibran. But anyway, for the most part, I kept my curiosity and my concerns. I mean, I just kept it all inside. Didn't talk about it. Nobody else talked about it. But occasionally something would pop out. Like I remember, this is a very big deal for me, that at the dinner table, my father was like very thick, very mundane, just, factory working, beer drinking, read the newspaper kind of guy. And that's all he did. I never saw him doing anything else. And so probably it was a hellish job that he had. And but he used to come home and he would talk about the goddamn niggers at the factory. Yeah, I mean, nowadays, oh my God, you can't say something like that, but it's very common. And I just used to hate when he would talk like that. I just hated it. I would just be cringing, So then one day, usually I didn't say a word at the table. I was like the good girl. I just sat there, ate my meal. My brother was the one that was often getting in little back and forth with my parents that was annoying. But, I didn't mind. I ate all my food and I sat there quietly. And, but my dad, this was like, Finally one day I said, but Dad, what makes you think that you're better than those people just because you're white and they're black? And then everybody just I remember, it's like everybody sort of froze at the dinner table. And my dad was just shocked that I would say such a thing. And he hauled off his arm and he just whacked me right off of my chair. Can you believe it? I mean, I never got hit. My mom used to wash my mouth out with soap if I said shut up or a bad word or damn was the worst, And we just used to laugh at my mom because she could never discipline us because she was too nice. So we didn't really get hit, My dad knocks me off my chair on the ground, and my mom screaming, "John, what are you doing?" And he actually kicked me. And so I just ran up to my room and slammed the door and didn't come out. I didn't want to talk to anybody. So, that was kind of the end of me sharing my feelings at the dinner table. Of course, I hated my dad for forever because of that. But yeah, God, just to say something like that, it was like as if it was so radical. And anyway, for a lot of time, I really loved going to church. We went to this church. It was, even though it was Presbyterian, it was more like a Catholic church because it was really big and really beautiful, stained glass and a huge pipe organ. And I used to love it when everybody sang all together, and I thought it was really cool. I really liked it. I don't know what we're singing about, but the sound of that big organ through the whole church. And, I just thought Jesus was really cool. And so I remember sitting there and saying, Jesus, if you're there, I mean, I just want to see you. Can't you just show yourself? Couldn't you just, in that alcove over there, just show me, so it's like demanding to see Jesus. Of course, I never did. But, I felt this connection, and so I started getting all the books that I could find, in the library and whatever. We had a lot of books at home. And I read everything about all Jesus and all the saints, connected and everything. And I thought, wow, this is cool. I liked it. I really liked it. And maybe I could be a nun or something, It's like, well, that idea didn't last for very long. But anyway, these times, this was before the sexualization of everything. So we didn't hear much of anything about sex. It was all hidden when I was growing up. Of course, there were like little girly magazines that were in the back of, the local store in a corner, but, only like weirdos would really go and buy those things. My uncle had some playing cards with like, we showed the women's breasts, and we used to go and look at them and go, oh my God, so stupid. And, there wasn't, at this time, they did not have any sex education in school. And so basically, I learned everything, whatever I learned from my brother, how babies are made. He told me, and I was like, no way, my mother would never do that. I thought, how could it be that, adults, they're so prim and proper with their manners and their morals, we're rolling naked together like animals, and I thought, me and my brother, it's so disgusting. So, kids, their first impressions, they're often kind of right on. And like I remember at the dinner table, it's horrible to think, but, say we were having chicken and somebody would say, could you pass me a leg or pass me a breast, And I remember saying, don't call it that. Why are you calling it that? It sounded so terrible. And, because people don't really know, kids, they don't know what they're eating, they don't connect that this is an animal. This is just something from the store all in a package. And, my mother, well, honey, that's what it is. And I was like, oh, it can't be, it was, and I remember the first time my dad took me fishing. And, it's like really fun. You go on the boat and you got the pole and then something starts nibbling and wow, it's all exciting, And, it seemed like it was really fun. And then, then we had to go. My dad said, come on, we got to go clean the fish, And then I was like shocked. He's like killing them and then scraping them. And I became hysterical, crying. And I was like, no way, I would never eat that, So it was like, it's natural that children do have a repulsion. And they see things clearly till they're programmed to see differently, and get covered over, that you don't feel those are natural things. And then there were times where I really felt like I was being sort of shaken awake or like remembering something that seemed important. Like I still remember very clearly walking past a bookstore and they have the books on display and there was a book that said yoga and I just like stopped in my tracks. And I was like, what? It was like as if there were lights shining on it and arrows pointing. That something. I didn't know what it was, really, But I thought, that's interesting. Then I went inside and I looked at the book and I was like, yeah, I was just a kid, I was young. And then I was in the grocery store and I saw a sign, again, like flashing lights on yoga class. I mean, I don't think I was more than 11 at this time. And then I thought, well, where is that? Maybe I can go, So I went to this yoga class. It was like, a handful of old ladies, and they were doing exercises. And I was like, I thought it was something else. And then they asked me if I had the money to pay, and I'm like, no, I don't have any money. I'm just a kid. I shouldn't have to pay for yoga. Somehow I had this feeling that, yoga, why should you have to pay for it? It's not a business, is it? So there was all this kind of confusion, And then I also remember, these are very vivid, I hardly remember anything of my life, really. And there's just like these certain strong, boom, things that I still remember. And watching on TV, there was a vegetarian who was on, and he was on TV because he was a vegetarian. He was being interviewed. And I was like, oh my gosh, I just became so fascinated. I thought, yeah, we should do that. And then I said, Mom, come look. This guy, he's totally a vegetarian. And she's like, well, he couldn't be healthy. They had all these charts that showed you, in order to be healthy, what you had to eat, and a certain portion of it, big portion had to be meat, So I'm like, no, I think this is right. I think he's right. So I was a little young to really be able to actually do it, because I live it. But, I started to kind of scrape that off my plate as much as I could. And then, like when I was about, I think I was about 11, I had a near-death experience. I got very, very ill, and they rushed me to the hospital. It was just a sudden thing, and it was very extreme. And they rushed me to the hospital, and my appendix had perforated. And it was very, very serious. And they actually thought I was going to die. And so I remember I was laying there on the table, and they were going to take me into the operating room. And I remember that. So I'm like, because I heard them a little bit talking, I'm like, oh my God, what is happening? You don't, when you're young, you don't think about death so much. And so then this Catholic priest, he came up to me and he said, you're going into surgery now. I would like to give you your last rites. Wow, I was like, my last rites? I was like, that means I'm dying. I'm going to die. And then I could think, yeah, but, that's a Catholic thing, isn't it? I don't know, what do I know? And so I said, well, I'm not Catholic. And he went, I remember so clearly. He went, oh. And then he walked away. And I was like, what? What kind of priest are you? You're going to let me die here? Because I'm not Catholic? I just thought, oh, that's crazy. There's something really wrong there, Anyway, I didn't die, but it was a heavy experience. It was my first kind of, heavy experience in which I could have, and I was very, very ill for quite a while. And soon after that, my grandfather died. So that was the first time I saw a dead body. And, we had gone to the funeral parlor, and there's the body there laid out. And I could not stop thinking about it after I'd seen that. It was like I was haunted by it. I kept thinking, wow, oh my God, well, what happened to him? And then look at him. It's horrible what he looks like now. And, this is going to happen to everybody, and that's how I'm going to look. Then, and what actually happened? What changed? Where did he go? It was just, oh my God, this is real. This is it, that everybody is going to die. And, it's the first time, really. There's when you realize. And, so although, there really wasn't anything wrong in my life. And, I was well cared for and loved. But I had this underlying feeling that, you know, something is just not right. And I wasn't really very happy. I wasn't happy. I wasn't unhappy, you know, like, I mean, I was a kid, you know, you play, you do whatever, but there was some unhappiness inside. And so my first method of escape from those feelings was through reading. That was my first form of intoxication. I just started to read voraciously. Because through reading you can go away to all other worlds, and I love to read. And in our home, we had a really, really good library. I mean, my mom was a real reader. She never talked about anything. I don't know, but we had all the classics. And, you know, I just like whipped through them one after another. I just loved to be taken to another place. I mean, to me, that was my education, I was just reading. And this is how I learned. I mean, school was just kind of, you know, something you had to do. But I remember reading all these, you know, classics, like, you know, all the Jane Austen books, you know, Pride and Prejudice and Charlotte Bronte, Jane Eyre and Gone with the Wind and Annie of Green Gables, just whatever was in our bookshelf. All Mark Twain and Huckleberry Finn and Moby Dick. I mean, some heavy stuff, Moby Dick, War and Peace. I don't know. I got into even, you know, very heavy, thick, big books, Grapes of Wrath, and was, you know, I felt like I was getting out of this tiny superficial world that I felt that I was in. And I never really envisioned any kind of particular future for myself. Like, I didn't think, oh, I want to be a doctor, or, you know, I never wanted to be anything. I thought it was kind of weird. Everybody wants to be something. What do I want to be? I didn't have any, like, kind of drive towards any career or even to marry or have kids. I didn't think, oh, I can't wait, or I don't know. It just didn't come into me. It didn't come into my mind. And I just had this kind of feeling like I was just waiting for something. And so, you know, definitely the seeds of discontent were sown from the time that I entered this body. That's what I can tell from looking back. And now going into the 60s, I'll have to do another talk. Hare Krishna.